Hello, you're listening to Kopi Time, a podcast series on markets and economies from DBS Group Research. I'm Taimur Beg, Chief Economist. Welcome to our 73rd episode. Today, we will take a break from current affairs and talk about something for the medium term, specifically the direction of technology to better our lives and the kind of work that is being done here in Singapore by intrepid entrepreneurs to achieve that. Our guest is Manik Bhandari, CEO and founder of Vulcan AI, an artificial intelligence company that focuses on building safety and productivity solutions for Industry 4.0. We'll elaborate on all that. Previously, Manik was a senior partner at EY, where he set up and ran the analytics business for ASEAN and delivered AI-powered productivity projects across government, agriculture, transport, and logistics sectors. Manik Bhandari, welcome to Kopi Time.
Good morning, Taimur. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to the conversation.
Great to have you here. I have had, small chit-chats about this issue with you in the past, but I look forward to having an in-depth chat today. Manik, let's begin by setting some context. As a tech entrepreneur based in Singapore, you're part of the local ecosystem. So even before we talk about your company and your products, tell us about your experience with the Open Innovation Program and IMDA, and also for the benefit of the listeners, sort of introduce to them what these programs are.
Yeah. Taimur, in Singapore, there's a whole lot of corporates, there are government agencies, which have various problem statements. Like they could be dealing with issues regarding to manpower, safety, security, many different issues and problem statements. Now, what happens is sometimes, when you are looking for an answer to that problem statement, there may not be a ready solution for that. And if you want the smartest brains to work on it, you would typically do an RFP, and a big consulting company would come in and they will custom build a very nice solution for you. And it turns out to be pretty expensive, takes a year, and it may still fail, right? So that kind of is one of the reasons why an open innovation program works quite well. So what the government has tried to do is they have multiple problem statements, which they collect sometimes from government agencies, sometimes from corporates. And then they have an ecosystem of startups as well as companies, and they connect the two. So there are problem solvers and there are problem statement owners. So they host these challenges every few months. They list down the problem statements, and then as a startup, you can take a look at it. And then two things can happen. One is you may look at the problem statement and say, hey, I've done something like that before, and I can take what I have, change it, and I think I can solve that problem. Or the second is you look at it and then you say, which is what we did, is that this problem seems worth solving, right? If we can solve this problem, I think we can make a lot of money because a lot of other companies will have similar, problem statements. So you go in with that mindset, and what the government does, IMDA, what they do is, they essentially give a little bit of a prize money to do a POC. So you may get
proof of concept.
Yeah. Yes, so you get a proof of concept. So you get some seed money. So it's like a seed round, but without any stake. But basically, IMDA puts up some money. The problem owner puts up some money, and that gets you going. And then once it's proven, like it worked, the prototype works, then the company may adopt it, or they may actually help fund it further so that you can actually productize the solution and sort of go to market with it. And I think the reason it's a very good program, because what it does, it is basically channeling the best thought leadership and capability to a problem statement, which is very relevant. And it's not like just for one person, it may actually help the whole industry. So it's a good utilization of resources, fast prototyping, fail fast. And basically startups also get the exposure, because sometimes startups may not have the business acumen or the network to actually understand what the real problem statements are from the industry. So this connecting of the industry with some young and sometimes not so young entrepreneurs to solve problems, it's a pretty good way of doing things.
Is this unique to Singapore? Because I can't think in the US, for example, the US government providing interesting incentives and nudges for Silicon Valley companies. It's a sink or swim situation there. Has Israel done stuff like this, or is it something that is very specific to Singapore?
Yeah, I think Israel does a bit of that. Plus, there are accelerators.
Yes.
And then the accelerators are basically it's like a informal JV between some big corporates and then some VCs, and they try to do that, right? So they identify some startups and then they pose those problem statements. But yeah, I've not come across as maybe there are other programs, but the IMDA Open Innovation Program, I think now it's in its seventh round, and I think there are like 100 problem statements which have been put forward, and it is operating at scale. And the good thing is they are basically unlocking startups' capabilities across the world. So it's not just a Singapore startup can apply. Like one of the challenges which we won, we were selected from 18 other startups around the world, right? So it is not just that, oh, just because you're a Singaporean startup, you get some extra credit, but yeah, it's good.
Fascinating. Manik, we'll talk about the innovations and the solutions that your company is doing, but can you, at the top of your head, think of a few other problem statements that were done that you didn't go for, but you thought were interesting and others are engaging?
Yeah, I think one of the ones I remember were sort of when COVID-19 came out, and there was social distancing and contact tracing which was supposed to be done. Then there was a startup which I think very quickly started using some BLE devices which the workers at construction sites could basically put on, and then you could keep track of people who are supposed to be in zone A versus zone B, and when they come close to each other, it buzzes, and it is basically on the prevention side. So I think that was pretty good. I think the technology was being used in cruises and casinos and other sort of use cases. They quickly took that and adapted it, and then I think now thousands of workers are already using it.
Right. I'm pretty sure that in terms of solutions for, say, climate change related activities, whether it's an easy to use carbon calculator or nudges people can have on a daily basis in terms of pursuing responsible behavior, I've seen applications like that all over the world, and sometimes it is sort of useful to have a non-commercial body sort of nudge the private sector, saying you can actually make money out of it and do good at the same time. And of course, Manik, as we go deeper into the conversation, I'll talk about this more. So let's talk about your company, Vulcan AI. I'm actually curious about the genesis of the name and why and how you set it up.
Well, I think I'll start with the name, because I mean, if anybody has watched Star Trek, right? So then Spock comes to mind. But that was not the reason why we called it Vulcan. I think when I started Vulcan, I was wanted to focus on Industry 4.0, and because my point of view was that as we digitize, I think there is a new way of doing things, whether it's improving the processes or improving yield, or now more recently digitizing of human work, right? So we were focusing on Industry 4.0, and then I was looking at like who was the god of manufacturing or metalworks, and then Vulcan was that. And when Vulcan clicked, I immediately thought, hey, that's also like Spock. And his whole point was that that alien sort of race was about not going with gut or emotion, but every decision they make is very logical and fact based. And that is the cultural change we wanted to drive in Industry 4.0. So it was a combination of those two ideas, and then that's how I came up with the name Vulcan AI. So the longer story is, I mean, I've been in consulting nearly 20 years, and it was fun. I mean, but you move from client to client and you solve very interesting problems, and clients pay you money to solve those problems and do that work because it's too difficult to do it for themselves, or it may not be core to them, right? So I had been working interestingly, initially mostly work was with telcos and banks, and that's mostly consumer data. So it was becoming, quite mature already, but it's the same thing. How do we sell more? How do we manage risk? That is the problem statement essentially. Then when I switched gears to another industry, so the whole agriculture and forestry industry was going through early stages of some big transformation. So the drones were becoming more and more pervasive. But the problem with drones was basically when you fly drones on these huge plantations or forests, it's hours and hours of flying data which you've collected, and you traditionally had people looking at that, eyeballing it, and then saying, okay, that tree there may have an issue. It doesn't look that green, right? So we did the math for one of the biggest paper companies in the world. And if they actually processed all the drone imagery manually, it would have taken them 100 people and 100 years to go through it. So it was just not possible. So one of the innovations we did was basically use of AI to automatically process all this imagery which is being collected and then pinpoint exactly which tree had an issue so they could do something about it. Now, this project was 12 months, 20 people, $3 billion. So, of course, for a big company, I mean, which is like a $10, $12 billion company, this is still pretty good ROI. Then we started thinking that, hey, if the same thing, if we have to democratize it and make it available for a small farmer somewhere, this is not going to work, right? So how do we make that shift? So the reason I started Vulcan AI was that how do we take some of the best kind of solutions and ideas which we had conceptualized for big MNCs, big companies, billion-dollar companies, and build it into products which are bite-sized, which even the small guy on the street or the small farmer can start using. So coincidentally, and I think that was a pretty good meeting of the minds, one of my biggest clients, which is a big Indonesian family business, which have interest in oil palm and paper and forestry, they said, that's great. Like, you build it for us, and then can we monetize it and open it up for others? Because this should become a utility. This does not have to be a secret competitive advantage. This should be a utility and everybody should benefit from it, right? So that's how we started. We started as like a JV between me and another big family business. And now we are at a stage where we have built these products and we are opening it up for other companies, and we are making the product so easy to use that and so easy to deploy that smaller companies, and the vision is that a small farmer, say in Bangladesh somewhere, can just open an app and get access to the same technology, which just 5 years back people were paying millions of dollars to access.
All right. So among the products that your company sells, so would that be the first one, that looking at satellite imagery of agriculture fields?
Yes, that's right. So I think our first basically flagship product is, and I will tell you a little bit of a story, right? Because it's important to visualize why it is important. So like one client of ours is 500,000 hectares. That's the amount of plantation they have. They have, so which is, I think, 20 times the size of Singapore.
There you go. That's a good and scaling point, yes.
Yeah, and it's an oil palm. So the way it works is basically you plant a tree, and then that plant gives you fruit for the next 25 years, right? And then and you don't need to do much, actually. You just have to give some fertilizer once or twice a year. And then every day, basically, there are harvesters who are going to the tree and harvesting the fruit. And then the fruit is then sent to the mill where it's converted into oil. And it's the same oil, which is, if you eat the McDonald's soft serve cone or French fries, it's the same oil which is being used. Palm oil is pretty prevalent. We may not know it, but it's there. And even if you have some beauty cream products, it's there, right?
Shampoos, toothpaste.
That's right. It's everywhere, right? And so the biggest things you can do to sort of change the yield in terms of, if I have 500,000 hectares, how do I make more money? The only thing you can do is make sure the tree is healthy and it's producing the fruit, right? And the quality of the fruit is good. And the levers there are mostly weather you cannot control, right? So weather is what it is. Fertilization you can control. And then the second thing you control is harvesting. You have to harvest it at the right time. Like, it's simple, right? So if you have a garden, then if you're planting tomatoes, you will pluck it when it's like ripe and ready, because you want to use it immediately. But with fruit, it's a bit different. So right, so the timing of the harvesting is really important. So they have 30,000 workers, right? So they have to then basically go and walk this 500,000 hectares and look at the trees and then figure out whether the trees are healthy or not. It's hot. There's wildlife, there are snakes. So for a regular person who's in the village and who's helping run this plantation, life is pretty tough. You may be walking tens of kilometers every day trying to find issues, but in the end, you may not still find it because you don't know where to look, right? So the big change we did was get the satellite image, we do the processing, then we give location of each tree where there could be an issue. Then this guy goes to that particular location and verifies whether it's correct or not, and then takes a picture, sends it back and say, yes, there is an issue. Either we need to spray some pesticide or more fertilizer. So it's basically completely changing the way things used to operate earlier, where people are just going around randomly walking and tough life. Whereas now they only go to the places where they actually need to go. So it's a much more targeted and less work, but the impact is a lot more.
Can you give us a sense of what kind of impact we're talking about? Is it like a 5% increase in yield or more than that?
Yeah. So the yield is it would be between 2 to 5%, which is, and it's just coming from simple, I would say, fertilizer optimization. Right. So basically, we can actually tell you that the nitrogen level of this particular tree is a bit low, so put more fertilizer. So that's the 5%. So if you give the fertilizer right time, the fruit production will go up, right? At the same time, you also don't want to put too much fertilizer because it's not good for the environment and the soil is right. So we also find out trees which are good, meaning you don't need to fertilize. And so one of our clients spends $300 million a year on fertilizer, and we saved like 20%. So which is that 60 million a year. But at the same time, it's great for the environment because you're not putting chemicals into the soil, right? So so on one side, you're increasing yield, but you're also doing it in a more sustainable way.
Manik, could we be a little more granular without giving away your trade secret? As in, how is this processing done? I mean, is it just a photo image analysis, like looking at the spectrum that the trees have?
Yes, I mean, you're right. Nearly there, you guessed it. So basically, when you take an image from the satellite, and it basically measures the reflectance. So when the sun bounces off, and it has basically infrared and red edge and the visible spectrum. So you have sort of energy bands across the spectrum, and then what is bouncing back, which they call reflectance, that will have a very unique spectral sort of profile for different things. So what we've done is we've taken like millions of trees, and these trees have been labeled by ground truthing that whether it's healthy or not healthy. And then we have matched. So the AI matches the spectral profile with what's good, what's bad. And I'm simplifying it, but basically that's what it does. But it has evolved to such an extent that not only does it tell whether it's healthy or not, you can even tell the type of disease which is suffering from. So it could be Ganoderma, leaf-eating caterpillar. And the beauty of that is once we tell that, the person doesn't even have to go and check. You can straight away go with the right intervention and the insecticide that you have to spray right there. And the sooner you fix it, right? So one tree is infected, it's like COVID-19, it can spread. So if 5 trees have it and you don't intervene on time, that disease will spread. And that's a massive impact on yield. So with satellite imagery, you're getting more recurring every 3 months, what's wrong. You take the action and you sort of nip it in the bud. In a way, it's like contact tracing.
Just hearing this, it sounds like it's a perfect solution for a very large farm. Is this also useful for a small farm?
Yes, I mean, there is obviously an inflection point where it may not make sense for a very small farm, because as a very small farmer, you're walking your farm and your whole livelihood depends on it. So you can see visibly if anything is going wrong, right? So it may not make sense in that context. But having said that, there are certain things which the satellite imagery gives you, which the human eye cannot. Like I was saying, as a human, you only see the visible spectrum. So you see what you see. But the satellite has more spectral band data coming in. And in fact, a lot of the nutrient and health information is captured in those bands. So the tree may look perfectly fine from outside to a naked eye, but actually there may be something wrong. So it still helps with early detection. So it does make sense. I think the only constraint probably is the order size. Let me rewind a little bit. So like 7 years back, satellite imagery was really expensive and the big governments of the world would use it for defense and intelligence, right? So now with the satellite space booming and it's pretty congested out there, the cost of satellite imagery is going down. So they have reduced the order size. But even now, if you want to get satellite imagery, you have to get at least 100 square kilometer, right? So it would not make sense to get that kind of satellite imagery for the small farmer. But cooperatives and governments are sort of, getting together, sourcing it at scale, and then distributing the insights to the farmers, because it does help the economy and the GDP.
Fascinating. Okay, so from agriculture to other products that you have, some of the stuff that you and I have talked in the past, share with us some of the other things that Vulcan AI is producing and marketing.
Sure. The other thing we focus on is what I would call is sort of the worker 2.0. I think we talk about industry 4.0. I think there's a lot of talk about AI automating things and robots taking over, but there are certain things which are you require humans to do that, right? So whether it's like in construction, or you're lashing containers on a ship, or cleaning toilets. I mean, of course there are robots, but they can't get everywhere. So I think that the point of view I have is that yes, I think productivity gains will happen, but humans are pretty essential, and there will be a lot of things, especially physical work, which may not be completely automated. So how do we make work and more enriched, safer, and better for blue collar workers, right? So like during COVID-19, you'd go to a Starbucks, but and you can work from there. But then when you go there, they could also be a cleaner who's cleaning the road, right? So life is pretty tough for them. So I consciously decided that we should be using AI not to just replace humans, but make lives better for the more sort of blue collar workers whose life is pretty tough. So we developed a solution which basically taps into wearables, and there is AI in it, which sort of gives nudges to them if they are sort of not taking care of their health, or if they fall down during the course of work, then an alert is sent to the supervisor so they can send help. Or it could be keeping track of their exertion, because it's physical exertion, and giving them nudges that, hey, you may be dehydrated, can you rest a little bit? So it gives them those nudges. So they can take control over their health and sort of fatigue and exhaustion while they're working. But more importantly, we're also giving visibility to the enterprise level, to the employer, to basically point out areas or teams which may be overworked and may be at risk of workplace accidents. Because sometimes people, you may have 50 people working at a construction site, and there may be somebody who has a pre-existing heart condition, and you may not even know that, and you've given him the same amount of work as somebody else, and then but you don't want people to just die on your watch, right? So this gives them that, okay, fine, I have the same 50 people, but this person you can reallocate resources based on how they react to physical stress or exertion. Because what we can now show employers is that same amount of exertion, physical exertion, which is captured based on physical movement and heart rate, what is the impact on fatigue, what is the impact on their heart rate, and you can rebalance the workload. So this solution is targeted at the construction sector, maritime sector, facilities management. We are now starting to use it for aircraft cleaning, because the other thing we do is, just like in your Fitbit, basically using your hand motion, it can detect whether you're exercising or not. We have work activity detection, meaning if you are doing some work, it can quantify that work activity. So like in agriculture, when you're spraying fertilizer, you spray like that. It's a very unique hand motion. We use AI, which is embedded in the variable, to convert it into fertilization. Then if the plantation owner wants to see, okay, which part of my plantation was fertilized, which one was not, because most of it is still manual application, we can see that, and we can sort of have a geospatial view of that. So the idea is make the person's job safer, make him more in charge of his own health and fitness, but at the same time also give an aggregate view to the employer, so they know where the risk and the hotspots are in their workforce, so they can manage it better.
Naive question, which is by wearable, do you mean a watch, or does it have to be, or could it be something else?
So right now we have our own watch. Okay. So we have basically optimized, because the one thing we wanted to do was we didn't want to send the data out of the watch. And so we needed like a smart watch, like with some inherent sort of a good processor, so that we can embed our AI inside it. So it's always listening in terms of the sensor data and processing it, And only when the person has an incident or needs help, we send an alert back.
And what's been the experience so far in terms of overall sort of health and well-being of workers in the pilots or the actual cases that you have looked at so far?
I think surprisingly, the workers have been very welcoming. I think they are quite complimentary. There's two things which they really like. One is they think that, and rightly so, that the company is investing in their safety and health.
That's right.
So that's good. It's like generally the thing is that, we're just working. Nobody cares enough. And, finally the company has bought and then is now keeping track of my safety. The second thing, which is more, I would say, in a more lighthearted way, is that they also feel very happy when they go back to their family and then say, hey, I have a new smartwatch. Because the smartwatch, it has two modes. It has a work mode and it has like a life mode. So when you go to work, it's running all those AI things to keep you safe and productive. But when you check out of work, it's just another smartwatch and you can watch YouTube, listen to music, you can do all of that. So it comes also as a employee perk. So the reception has been quite good. I think on the corporate side, there is some resistance, I won't say to the idea, but some resistance to like what the business case is, right? Because like if you're a company which provides cleaners, say to MBFC, then they will say, I am footing the bill, but it's not like DBS is paying me for this, right? So because I am also a service provider to somebody. So the angle we are taking in, and this is with the government and the union, is that we need to educate the service buyers, the end clients, to basically tell them that safety is important. You don't want a cleaner to slip and break his hip while he's working at MBFC Tower 1, right? They say, yeah, of course, we don't want that. Then you say, okay, then your cleaning company, you tell them that they need to equip these solutions in their workforce. And to be honest, it's like $5-10 a month per person is hardly anything. So if the solution is there, and if people want it, people will definitely take it, right? So that was one. The second one, which I don't think is the right attitude, but we do come across some people. I was talking to a person who manages like 100 cleaners, and his point, I think he was a bit too transparent, was that if I give this watch, then we may discover people who have heart rate issues, and then we may have to find replacements for them, which is true.
Yes, of course.
Which is true. But when you're in a constrained labor market, you don't want to unearth suddenly, and then your client is saying, hey, 10 of your cleaners are not, healthy enough to do this kind of work. I need younger, I need healthier. So there is that, fear which people have. And I think this fear is quite valid for the person who's wearing it also. Like if my sole livelihood can be impacted just because I'm not healthy. Like for you and me, it doesn't make a difference, right? So if I have a hypertension or something and, I will go to the doctor, but I can still continue to do my work. But if you're like a sole breadwinner and somebody gives you a watch, all good. But the watch tells you that actually you're at very high risk of getting a heart attack while you're working. And hence we have to find somebody else. It's pretty scary.
Very interesting. It's a double-edged sword. And I think that, of course, we want all employers to do the right thing, which is look after the well-being of their employees. But an employee perspective, when they're the sole breadwinner, you are posing a very, very interesting dilemma. Manik, are there other sort of applications of the same model?
We're doing a lot of work on sort of general improving productivity using AI. Like one of the solutions we have with JTC, Jurong Town Council, is around estate inspection. So, they are one of the biggest landlords in Singapore, and they also maintain or basically inspect the roads regularly. So given that there is not enough people in Singapore, we're not able to inspect the roads as regularly as you want. And you would have noticed over the years, the number of potholes has gone up, and the potholes don't get fixed as soon. And it's not just about a comfortable ride, right? It's a safety risk because people sometimes may swerve out to avoid the pothole and accident. Plus you have delivery riders. So one of the things we did was we basically took our AI and embedded into sort of like a small edge device. This edge device is now being put in buses and other vehicles. So as you're just driving around, the AI is automatically detecting potholes, tagging it with the location, and then sending it back. So instead of having somebody inspected once a year, so we have like Uberized the road inspection process. So that's another pretty cool project which we're now scaling to the rest of Singapore.
Back in the States, in the middle of the night, they have this ad. It's called "I've fallen and can't get up" ad. So it's about the elderly, and a signal goes out to the nurse or the caregiver or their children that the elderly person has fallen and they need help. I think you have something like that up your sleeve as well, correct?
Yes, that's right. And in fact, we tried to move away from this. May be giving away too much, but basically, we're trying to move away from the wearable because the elderly may not wear it at night, and at night is when you have most of these incidents. So we're trying to come up with some hacks where you basically stick a device next to the bed, and then basically it is able to then figure out whether you're on the bed or you're not on the bed. So a simple rule which basically says, hey, it's nighttime and you've been away from your bed for more than 1 hour, send an alert to your family or to somebody else because you should be in your bed. So like simple tweaks like that with technology and you can solve big problems.
Yeah, fine line between being too intrusive and being cognizant of one's well-being. I think that's where you have to do a lot of tweaking.
Yes. I mean, the way we deal with it is that because in the consumer setting, you can assign who you want the alert to go to. So the power is with the person who's so you stick the device, then you say, okay, this is the person I want to send. So it's like your emergency contact, right? So it's That's you right. who's saying who needs to be alerted.
That's right. That's right. Manik, I was going to ask you a question about the sort of lessons for or the medium-term challenges in terms of bringing the customers, but I think we sort of more or less covered that. I want to stay with this point because I'm picking up this theme from your responses that you are very much in favor of sort of an ethical use of AI, which is a big issue out there. And you are a contributing author to Singapore's first AI ethics body of knowledge. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I think a great question. So as AI becomes more pervasive, I think we come across a little bit of ethical dilemmas once in a while. Like I was talking to somebody who was doing a project for one of the big casinos, and they had developed an AI model whose objective function was to obviously maximize profit, right? So it was more around that. How do you optimize the line of credit? Like if you want to gamble, and how much can you give, and how do you manage risk? But what was missing from that objective function was that are we making this person a habitual gambler, and and then that and can he really afford it, right? So now do you do that or do you do the profit optimization? So there is this trade-off. Of course, in pure profit optimization, you also don't want that person to go completely over the top so that he goes bankrupt and doesn't come back. So there's always that balance. But there are these kind of questions which are coming up more and more because in the traditional world, it's a human and the human uses some judgment. Part of it is emotional, part of it is profit seeking, and you try to balance and you do it. But different people may react to it in different ways. And the way AI works, it's been basically trained on decisions which have been made in the past. So unless you also tell whether this decision was good or bad, the AI will learn from whatever decisions have been made in the past. So there are some parameters which we can set to improve the ethical implementation of AI. So with that in mind, basically the Singapore government and the Singapore Computer Society, and it was announced in the World Economic Forum. It's the first sort of body of knowledge of its kind, where there are case studies in terms of what could go wrong, but they also specify the things that we have to keep in mind to make sure that we're doing the right thing. And it has basically 4 different dimensions. So one is around governance, and the governance is basically in the AI value chain, there are different players. It could be the business owner, there's the data guy, there's the AI guy, and then the person who executes it. So who governs that? How do you formulate the right problem statement? And it should also become part of the board agenda, because things can really go wrong if you don't implement it correctly. So it talks a little bit about governance around that. Then the second important point is around human centricity, which is basically saying, hey, we still need to put humans at the center of it. And when we design something, it has to be designed with the human's best interests in mind. So then there are sort of steps on how to do that. The third piece is around operations management, and operations management is more around over a period of time, circumstances change, environment change, data changes, and the model may drift. So when you put an AI model into production, how do you make sure it is not biased, it is fair, and there should be like statistical measures put in place to manage the operations of that. And lastly, it talks about stakeholder communication. So like, how do you communicate to every user in the sort of ecosystem, right? So basically, if you are in the gambling example, if you're refusing to give credit, why are you doing that, and how do you explain it? Because people may say, hey, I didn't get it, but my friend got it. So it doesn't have all the answers, but at least it gives you a toolkit to start thinking, start sensitizing yourself to ethics, and some frameworks to be more smart about ethical implementation.
I think it's extremely important to do that, Manik. I mean, the world is almost flat in terms of social media apps and various, wearable apps that are ubiquitous in a developed country across societies. But the capacity to deal with some of these ethical ramifications seems to be very uneven. So I'm glad that, you and your colleagues in Singapore have sort of pushed it through. And I hope that it's not just a question of, Singaporean companies benefiting from it, but it has some degree of global reach because, it affects all of us. Facebook is not just for some rich countries, it's everywhere. And similarly, I want to talk a bit about your personal experience as an entrepreneur in general, as also in the context of being an entrepreneur in Singapore. Now, it's a small nation. It is wealthy. It is well educated, has world-class infrastructure, notwithstanding the potholes that you were talking about. But the markets here are small by global standards, and so is the talent pool. So how should a local entrepreneur deal with this scaling issue as far as Singapore is concerned?
Yeah, I think what Singapore has is, I think, a very forward-looking government. And I think they catch the uptrends pretty early on. Like, I think right now, it's tech, it's AI, it's, all the consumer apps. So I think there is, and we're now switching very quickly to make sure that we have enough talent to, serve that demand. So that's one. Plus, there is a lot of support. I would say both financial support as well as just guidance and getting local entrepreneurs connected with local companies to do some cool work, try out new solutions, but also globalize. I mean, the way they have architected the whole value chain is pretty amazing, right? So very early stage, you have these innovation programs where people give problem statements and you do that. So we also benefited from that, right? So some of our products are coming out of that. So you do the problem, you do the proof of concept, you have the prototype, there is some seed funding, you do that. Then the next step is basically you have, so IMDA will help with that. Then as it starts to get some traction, there is Enterprise Singapore, which focuses on local SMEs, right? So a local startup would qualify as a local SME initially, right? So then they have programs where they would even give you 80% of the cost of doing a pilot with any other company in Singapore. So now you sort of have a few pilot clients and the product market fit is established. The next step is basically you want to globalize. Now the Singapore government also has sort of funding and support available to open offices overseas and again do those pilots. Now, once you've done that, then obviously then the VCs and the institutional investors then kick in and they also help make those connections. So the infrastructure is there, the funding is there. I think the talent we're slowly getting there. So it's actually a pretty good place to have a startup and do things. But you're right. In terms of scale, you may not have that scale, right? So it's a great place to start a startup, but you have to have the mindset that I need to make it global to really make it big. So even when you start in conceptualizing, you always have to put the lens on that. Is this problem statement something which can apply to other markets, and how do I globalize? So I think that it's a good springboard. good, I would say, a test bed to do things, but but the capital is here, but you have to think global if you have to be successful.
How open is the rest of Asia to Singapore entrepreneurs? So if you develop a product here, introducing and marketing it in Southeast Asia or South Asia, or even the holy grail of all, China, I mean, is that a conceivable, realistic dream? And are there examples where companies have gone big?
So I will give two data points on that, and this may not represent, everything. I think one is, I think the reputation of Singapore as a tech hub is still not there. I think it's not like if you talk about Israel, then oh wow, that anything which is coming out of it out of Israel is good. So we are not like that. I think what we are known in the market is more for like valuation, capital, and people raising big rounds and things like that, right? But I think in terms of tech, I think our branding is not there yet. So other markets may not immediately think that, oh, just because you're a Singapore startup, you must be good in tech. That is not the connection they will make. But having said that, what I've realized is that if you are playing in the industries which Singapore is known for, like you can be a tech company, which is say in the real estate or construction sector, you will be taken more seriously because Singapore is known for that. If you're in fintech, and you will be taken more seriously because Singapore is a financial hub, right? And we have one of the world's biggest ports and maritime industry is big, right? So if you do something tech in maritime, again, you will be taken very seriously. Same thing with airlines. You have Singapore Airlines, Changi Airport. So if you are in a tech startup which is focusing on these industries which Singapore is famous for, then I think you have a much better chance of being sort of appreciated and taken seriously than if you, like for us, for sure. Like when I talk about agriculture, people will say, hey, what? I mean, Singapore doesn't even have agriculture. What are you? Why are you? Right. So they will not take it serious. But of course, we counter that because we have years of experience. And even though the team is here, our experience is outside Singapore, right? We don't have a client in Singapore, but everybody's outside. So I think that's the challenge. The other thing I think which is worrisome is I've talked to some VCs and we talked about the ease of getting funded in Singapore, and so this was some Malaysia-based VC, and their point was, and I'm not sure whether it's right or wrong or even politically correct, but what he was saying that don't take money from sort of Singapore because you may end up getting fat and lazy. Right. So basically, there's a lot of easy money out there. And he's saying over the last 10 years, he's seeing so many startups. It's so easy to make money that it is not the scene where, there is a startup guy and, he's worrying about his next paycheck and he just has to get it right. So that kind of aggression, desperation is missing from the Singapore startups. And his point of view is that, Singapore startups have it easy. There's a lot of government support, right?
It's interesting, right? So you could argue that today, even in Silicon Valley, there is so much money, and you were talking about accelerators earlier. It may not be driven by the public sector, but there are these very, very large accelerators out there, which also make capital available to just about any single idea that's out there, which also leads to massive boom-bust cycles. So I don't think that is necessarily specific to public support for entrepreneurism. Private sector also overreaches and overinvests and invests in ridiculous things many times as well. But no, from the very beginning of this conversation, I've been struck by the proactive role the government of Singapore plays in nudging entrepreneurs in going in the right direction. As long as it is producing value for the society, I see nothing wrong with that. You briefly touched upon skills and labor, so let's get into that. We've been reading a lot about it lately. And as a company that is growing that you run, Manik, I'm sure you recruit regularly. So what are you seeing in terms of the homegrown supply of labor? And maybe going even one step further, what can be done to get Singaporeans ready for this tech-heavy future that is inevitably out there?
Yeah, I think it's quite clear that there are not enough Singaporeans to meet the current tech demand. We've seen, salary expectations changing within days. It's like when you interview somebody a week ago, his salary expectations are X. And then by the time you get around to making an offer 2-3 weeks later, he's already got 3-4 other offers, and now he's expecting 2x, right? So that is just not sustainable, right? And I think there is this huge divergence which is happening between the tech haves and the tech have-nots, right? Because at the same time, I take Grab rides, and then I'm talking to some of these Grab drivers, and some of them have been displaced, and they had regular jobs before COVID, and they got displaced, and smart guys, but it's so much easier to basically, for the short term, like if you have a 2-year blip, something like COVID, to basically just become a Grab driver, do delivery, and you can sort of you can support your family, right? So. But that displaced group, and I think in the earlier days we had semiconductor and other industries, right? I think that to us offers a much bigger pool of people and opportunity, and that can change in 6 months, right? So if you address the talent from, like, let's start teaching coding in schools, and then let's have 6 new programs, say in NTU or NUS for computer science. It will take time. It will take 4, 5, 6 years to see that come on board. But if you take some of these other people who are professionals, they're very serious, they're very hardworking, and between 30 to like 50 years of age, and if we can tap into that and get them some sort of basic tech skills, that unlocks a huge opportunity for us, right? So I think that if we have to focus on that, but I think it needs some education, because the programs are there, right? You have the Skills Future, and you have a whole lot of subsidy available, but we need to do more in terms of education, that computer science doesn't need to be that complicated, right? With and there are a lot of no-code platforms, so you may not even need to code. And there are other aspects of tech you can get into. It could be design, it could be testing, it could be other things where you may not necessarily have to code. So if we tell people that you can be a non-techie but still do a good tech role, I think that may unlock a lot of the sort of talent which we have, but traditionally we've not been able to tap into.
Oh, no-code platform. That's a very, very nice way of putting it, Manik. And I think that would be music to the ears of many who out there are keen to embrace the future where technology is everywhere, but they feel that their math skills are not good enough, or their coding skills are never going to be good enough, and therefore they probably will get left behind. And I think, to your point, that there is a whole ecosystem that is beyond just the engineering aspect, but is also very high value added, and people can have worthy careers and make lots of money and be part of the whole tech zeitgeist. Now, Manik, looking at the video, it looks like you're in your office. So you're not working from home?
No, I've been working from the office more and more in the last few months. Yeah.
All right. Why? I thought people like you can work anywhere and have given on the concept of office, or am I misjudging that?
So we have team A, team B, and I like to spend time with each of the teams. And I think some of the brainstorming work, whiteboarding, I think it's best done face to face. But what we've done for our team is we have no prescribed regime, as in who needs to come and when they need to come. We let our pods figure out when they want to come. And so it's pretty flexible. And we are now using the office more as I would say like a social brainstorming kind of a facility where people just come in and you whiteboard. And because we have physical infrastructure, right? So like we have the watch and we have sensors and all of that. So it's become more like a lab. So you basically come here, you try out different things, and it's a good, people want to come here, right? So I think when the government allowed people to come back, they were so happy. Everybody was back. Yeah.
I'm so happy to hear that, especially your point that, the workplace is also becoming a point of sort of social interaction for the team to come together. So yes, some of the work may be doable from home, maybe a lot of the work, but at the end of the day, you work with human beings and you need to see them in person to get full synergy. I think that's a great note to conclude our discussion. Manik Bhandari, thank you so much for your time and insights.
Thanks, Howard.
Thanks also to our listeners. Kopi Time was produced by Ken Delridge from Spy Studios. This is his first episode of Kopi Time. Welcome, Ken. Daisy Sharma and Violet Lee also provided additional assistance. Kopi Time is for information only and does not represent any trade ideas or recommendations. All 73 episodes of Kopi Time are available on YouTube and all major podcast platforms, including Apple, Google, and Spotify. As for our research publications, webinars, and live streams, you can find them all by Googling DBS Research Library. Have a great day.